Thanks for coming, everyone. My name's Richard, and I teach meditation. And this is Nicole, who's a psychotherapist, works with children, and Nicole Schnackenberg. And we work together running a kind of mindfulness or non-duality, a spirituality group. It's online, supporting people. Particularly, it's focused around body image concerns, although we're welcoming of wider areas of mental suffering, really, because we feel that the underlying thing is how we're looking at it from that spiritual lens rather than the condition itself. So that's what we're going to talk about. We'll talk a bit more about ourselves in a minute, and we'll talk about the work we do, and maybe do something experiential around how we look at these things, our own selves, our lives, any problems we encounter from a non-dual perspective. We'll go into what that means.
So as Richard said, we're going to speak a little bit about our work essentially, which is supporting people through practices such as mindfulness and other transpersonal ways of seeing things, particularly people that are struggling with food and body image difficulties. But actually it all boils down to the same thing anyway, which I think is probably the crux of what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. So where to begin? I guess the most obvious place to begin is with the infant that comes into the world. So we all came into the world in the same way, or pretty much. We certainly all came in as infants, as tiny, tiny babies. And of course we were completely helpless at that point, weren't we? So, and totally reliant on our primary caregiver for our needs. So as this tiny, very vulnerable little baby, we were not able to get up from the cot to prepare ourselves the milk or find our way to the breast. We were not able to cover ourselves with a blanket to keep ourselves warm. We were absolutely reliant on that being done for us. So we were reliant on our caregiver for our survival. And this seems to be a foundational human template. We don't really seem to lose this sense of, if I can't maintain connection in some way, then I may die actually. If I can't maintain love, I could die. So a foundational human template of love being synonymous with life and lack of love being synonymous with death. And actually the infant, and indeed as adults, we react with absolute terror to any sense that we might be unlovable. It's like, oh, you know, and it may not be a kind of explicit verbal memory. It could be a very procedural implicit memory, a very procedural implicit feeling of, if there's any possibility that I'm not lovable, if there's any possibility that I cannot connect with other human beings, I might die. That might be the end of me. And it's Wilfred Bion, the psychoanalyst, referred to it as a feeling of nameless dread. We can't even name it because it feels so dreadful. And so that's a foundational human template, that love is synonymous with life somehow, and that if there's any possibility that we're unlovable, that we're in grave danger. And I imagine that every person in this room has at some point experienced a questioning of their lovability, however small, or perhaps it was a big questioning. So at some point where you've had a sense of, am I actually lovable? Whether that's verbalised or whether that kind of lives in the body, that experience. And that leads us, of course, to want to save ourselves and to soothe ourselves. So if I feel that I'm unlovable, and for much of my life I believed that I was, my life so far, if I feel that I'm unlovable, then I have to do something about this. I have to make myself lovable for a start, because otherwise I'm in grave danger. And that comes from being an infant, when I would have been in grave danger if my mother had not attended to my needs. But also I need to soothe myself, because that's a horrible feeling. It's not a comfortable feeling to feel like you're unlovable. So in my own story, that kind of played itself out in a particular way. But of course, each of us will play that out in our own particular way. The root is the same, this root fear of annihilation, this root fear of being unlovable, this root fear of a lack of connection. But then the way it manifests can be very dependent on our conditioning, when we were born, the circumstances we were born into. So for me personally, I did feel intensely unlovable, and that's, it's no attribution of blame, it's transgenerational. My parents had their own traumas, I was their firstborn, and I think there wasn't necessarily the emotional capacity to connect with me in that way. I think they found me quite difficult to love. So there was this sense of, okay, I'm difficult to love, what's that about? What's wrong with me? Am I a monster? Is there something terrible about me that makes me unlovable? And it doesn't have to be that extreme, it could have been a lot more subtle than that. And indeed, my parents were very loving in many, many ways. But still this sense of I'm not lovable as I am. So I was looking then to find a way to make myself lovable, and I tried all sorts, as many of us are wont to do. So I tried to be like the consummate good girl and to get all the best grades in school and all the rest of it, and that kind of worked for a little while, but not wonderfully. And then I kind of looked to society, and I saw a very clear message in society that if you want to be lovable, you need to look a certain way. And I really hooked onto that. And I was born in 1982, so it was all like the Lycra and Jane Fonda, and my mum was really into that. And I thought, my mum places a lot of valence on appearance. Maybe if I can look differently, I will be less monstrous and more lovable. So I pinned my suffering, my pain, if you like, my sense of unlovability onto my appearance. And that kind of manifested then in diagnoses like anorexia and body dysmorphic disorder. But they're just labels, of course, labels for suffering. I could have gone down many other routes to try and make sense of my pain. And what I realised at a certain point is, and I'm sure that Richard will perhaps touch on this also, is that if we trace our suffering back and back and back and back and back, it does come back to this very core fear of unlovability, which is synonymous with the lack of nothingness, of void, of death. And the medical model was very much one of, and I think the societal model as well is very much one of, if you're suffering, if it hurts, especially if you end up with a label like anorexia, that's something that you need to fight, that's something to be abhorred, that's something to push away, that's something to run away from. And I tried that for many years, but it didn't get me very, very far, to be honest with you. But what did get me very, very far to where I feel I am now, which is in a place of great peace and great love of my body and of myself, and a deep knowing that I am lovable, was doing the opposite, was turning around, and it's been spoken about in different ways already today, turning around and staring my sense of unlovability in the face, and staring my sense of ugliness in the face, and the sense that I was a monster in the face, and allowing myself to feel my ugliness and to feel my monstrousness, and if that's even a word, to dive into it and to celebrate it and to invite it. And I thought that would be it then. I thought I'd go mad, I'd explode into 1,000 tiny, tiny pieces. They'd probably lock me up again, as I'd been locked up for my diagnosis previously, and that didn't go so well. But actually, it's not what happened. It's not what happened. And what I absolutely understood was, at the very, very, very heart of the darkness, at the fulcrum, at the centre point, is who we are. The light comes out of the darkness. The love that we are is in the very, very heart of our suffering, in the very, very heart of our pain. And our pain is there to tell our story, and thank God that it is. And if we allow it to tell its story without trying to push it away with, in my case, self-starvation, but we use all different ways, don't we, to push away our pain. Instead of pushing it away, but allowing it and inviting it and feeling it, so then it's told its story, it's done what it came to do, and it'd be like, bye, thanks very much, you've heard me. You might have been pushing me away for 20 years, but now you've given me a bit of airspace. I can leave you until the next wave comes, as it always will do. So I know, Richard, you've had some similar experiences to
Well,
that.
yeah, I mean, I tell my story a bit in the opposite way around. So for me, I got into the whole spiritual thing when I was about 18. I think I'd been a averagely miserable teenager before that. Interspersed these occasional moments of that dropping away and having this kind of wow experience at the wonder of life, and this kind of spiritual sense descending of like there's more going on here than just this material world into which we are born and doomed to die. It feels like there's just more to it, and not being able to marry that to my general sense of miserable and life's a bit crap and I've got these exams to do and I don't want to be here in this situation. And yeah, at about 18 I got into things like Zen, which really spoke to that sense of mystery and wonder and the blinding beautiful brilliance of the present moment. And that started up an exploration of looking into questions of like, okay, well, who is it that really lives beyond? I've always taken myself to be the stream of thoughts running through my head, that's like the Descartes' I think therefore I am. I'm some of those thoughts. And then it just occurred to me, like, I couldn't believe I got to 18 without thinking about this, but like, yeah, I go to sleep and those thoughts go away for like 8 hours every day, so who am I then? These kind of insights built into seeing that there wasn't a consistent self there, and that was both like amazingly interesting and troubling, because that was the foundation of everything, right? And it's starting to shatter. But on the whole, like getting into mindfulness and practices like that, life, I would say, for 3 or 4 years, from 18 to my early 20s, was on the up. It was getting better. I was stepping out of my more obsessive patterns of thought that consume us all and into a more physical sense of the world, finding freedom from repetitive patterns of thought. But then it all came kind of crashing down a bit, and this is fairly, I don't know, like archetypal on a spiritual journey, I suppose, of the stuff I'd suppressed throughout my life. That started to come up, the emotional baggage, and also just by going into myself and asking these questions of, well, who am I beyond thought, what's really there. I read the mystics and they talked about it being all love, and you know, you've got this all-loving consciousness of God at the centre of your being, but it wasn't my direct experience. It was like, my experience was kind of like this inner sense of bleakness, of just absence within, that if I stripped back everything that wasn't me, there was this big black hole, which I think Mike Cooley was alluding to this morning, if anyone was in his talk there, and it comes up a lot when people talk about non-duality. And that plunged me into a kind of existential crisis then, in a period of about 1.5 years of real depression, because my direct lived experience was it's all just a bit meaningless and crap, and there's nothing really there. There's no great sense of love or peace or joy within. It's just this emptiness that we just have to try and plaster some meaning over to get through life. So I was desperate to kind of like move through that and very stuck with it. And then I came across like some non-dual teachings about sinking into that, allowing oneself to fully dissolve in it, and I read an experience of a lady, this is the Brandon Bayes book we were talking about, of who described a very similar thing to what I was having, but this active dissolution within to it, and fully surrendering, giving oneself over to that darkness. They say, okay, come what may, if that's what I am, then that's what I am. I'm not going to hold back from it. I'm just going to fully be that. And I sat up one night allowing myself to have this sense of dissolving into it, of not holding on to anything but that. And nothing really happened, so I went to bed, and with the determination to get up and start again the next morning, because that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life now. I was going to really confront who am I beyond all other things. And I woke up at about 4 a.m, which was kind of typical for I'd often wake up and have a fit of depression for that 1.5 years I'm describing. But this time I woke up at 4 a.m, and I saw like all the people who were kind of dear to me in my life as this sort of waking dream, very vivid imagery around the bed, and they all started disappearing out into the distance. And it was like each one represented like an individual supply of love that was coming into me, what Nicole was referring to, like need of other people. And they were all going, and then it got down to one person, and they went, and then there was just this pure sense of aloneness, and this darkness, this void was absolutely present, and it completely transformed itself as I sunk into it, into that very classically described mystical experience of it's all an infinite ocean of love, which we're waves in that ocean appearing as individuals, and the manifestations of one mind, and all the things that mystics throughout the ages, from Europe to India and across the world, have spoken about. And that was just the depression gone. Like I woke up the day, and I was fine. I didn't know it was gone. I had to wait like 2 weeks. It hasn't happened now, and I've done all the things that usually set it off. But it was like my core angst had been spoken to, and it had resolved itself because of that. So that gave me an interest in the kind of the mystical experience in and of itself, but also in how thoughts can change, how they can be so stuck, how we can spend our whole lives stuck in the prison of patterns of thought. And we think we could think anything. If you ever try and change some of your deeply held beliefs, you could knock that wall down easier than change thoughts. People are prisoners to thoughts their lives long. And yet I just had this direct experience. There's a way they can change in an instant, profoundly. So that gave me a real interest in that. And I spent the next years of my life, up to and including the present day, really fascinated by how a certain state of consciousness, this non-dual state, this deep consciousness, can affect that shift in perspective of changing patterns of myself on one level, in how I see myself, but also in how I communicate with people who hold radically different political or religious beliefs. Can I shift into that state and come to see their point of view? So on all different levels. And that led into, ultimately, I was doing a lot of investigation around my felt sense of my physicality, and that led to meeting Nicole, and we put this support group together then, which we're running, and I'm currently doing a study for consisting of one-to-one sessions to see how this approach, how this transpersonal, this non-dual approach can be helpful to people who feel very stuck in themselves and feel prisoners to their thoughts. So,
and at the heart of that is really the invitation to people to dive into that from which they are running, or to run toward that from which they are running. So a lot of the people that come to our support groups have also pinned their psychological suffering onto their appearance. And of course it isn't about their appearance, but that's kind of the surface level, I suppose, onto which everything is being placed. And so the invitation is to say, okay, what about if you could make friends almost with this sense of ugliness? What about if you allowed it to speak? What might it say to you? What about if, rather than trying to fix your ugliness, and it could be anything, what about if trying to fix your career, fix your partner, fix yourself, fix your life? What about if, rather than doing all of that, you actually go to the very heart of the pain of that, which is this pain of being, of the fear of being unlovable, of the fear of being something less than we are. And actually what we are is love, which is why it feels so awful when anything comes aside from that. And I read something recently, you know, when you read something, it's like the shiver goes up your spine, and then you read it the next time, and so the shiver goes up your spine again. And it was so simple, and it was this. Fear knocked, courage answered, there was no one there. I think that's beautiful. And I think that's the very definition of courage. If we go toward fear and listen, really, really listen to what it has to say to us, because it's always got something very, very important to say. And what it has to say is actually the form of transportation, if you like, that takes us back to that sense of who we truly are, which is love at our core. Absolutely, of course it is. And I think a lack of separation is perhaps the best definition of love. So there's no clock in here, which is very disconcerting.
We've just gone 20 past, Nicole.
Oh, we're doing okay. That's great.
Yeah,
That's
I
really
was surprised.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
Got to pack up. No, we're good for a while longer yet. I think just to add to what Nicole was saying, like a lot of what we present in the group and more widely is that we feel it's very important, like how one would engage with anything like what could be called a mental health problem or any other problem. You can't divorce that from your wider view of life, okay? So if your perspective is that we are victims of the chemicals rushing around our brains, well, that will definitely take you in one direction with regard to how you might engage with the problem going on within. Or if you think we're affected by the voices of demons or something, then you're going to run away from negative voices in your head, right? And I'm not saying that any one of those is right or wrong. It's just to be aware that how we view the world more widely affects how we will engage with ourselves. So whether we think something like a body dysmorphic thought, which might be telling someone you're ugly and you should stay indoors, is that something to be cast out either with tablets or exorcism or some other way? Or is it, hang on, is there a message in this, which is the most perverse and illogical thought, really. You know, that you're the thing that's bullying you in your own mind, or in my case, this voice that's saying life is meaningless, it's all empty in the end. Yeah, I certainly could want to medicate that away, but it contained the most profound insights in me. It was calling me to look. It's saying, look, what's really going on in the foundations? You've based your life and who you think you are even on these false premises. So if you go beyond that which is false, so the idea that I heard a good quote myself recently, that our illnesses happen for us, not to us. Yes. That was a good one. The idea that there's a message within there if we can engage with it, whilst also acknowledging that, you know, they're a pain in the arse too. You know.
Yeah. And sometimes that can be really clear and tangible. So I've got a connection with the Hearing Voices Network as well, and they do amazing work. And people who hear voices are often diagnosed with schizophrenia or paranoid schizophrenia, and their voices are often medicated away, and often people want to get rid of their voices because they're bloody terrifying, actually. But the Hearing Voices Network and the Hearing Voices approach does something very different, and it actually does what we are talking about here, which is the voices are confronted, the voices are listened to and inquired into. And what's often found, or not often, always found, is that what the voice is saying is a metaphor for something deeper. In the very same way that depression is a metaphor for something deeper, that anorexia is a metaphor for something deeper, that personality disorder is a metaphor for something deep. You know, these are all just labels for essentially the same thing. So the metaphors, for example, people might hear voices such as the classics, aren't they? You know, you must kill yourself, you must kill your mother, you must set fire to the shed, whatever it is. But then when the person says to the voice, okay, that's interesting, you want me to set fire to the shed, and then really listens to the voice will always come back with something like, yes, that shed contains photographs of your grandparents maybe, and I want you to set fire to your connection with them because it's holding you back, because perhaps they treated you unkindly, or perhaps they treated your parents unkindly. The content of the voices is a metaphor to the deeper experience, and I think if we can respond to all of the stuff we're running from, and let's be honest, we're all running from something, however small it might be. We've all got something in our lives that we think, well, if only that thing would just go away, then, you know, maybe life would be a lot better. Or if that thing would just transform a little bit, then I could be relaxed, then I could be peaceful and zen, and everything would be rainbows and butterflies. If we could respond to that thing in the same way with curiosity, that's interesting. Why is this thing causing me so much pain? And what might that pain be pointing to? So in my case, the kind of ugliness story, the sense of, I must be unlovable because I'm ugly, and if I wasn't ugly I wouldn't be unlovable, and you can spend your whole life going around in that circle. My ugliness was a metaphor for my unlovability, my sense of unlovability, and when I inquired into that and found that actually I'm not unlovable, my sense of ugliness dropped away. And I looked in the mirror and I just saw a person as opposed to the monster I'd seen before. Yeah. So it's all the same thing, really. I feel it's all the same thing, and it can all be traceable back to this sense of who am I? Am I lovable or not? And of course we all are.
And just on the meditative side of things then, where that comes into this is in getting into a more reflective, somewhat deeper place in consciousness where these things can be seen. So I think this is a good analogy. Like if I cut my hands over my eyes, all I can see right now is my hands, but of course I can't really see my hands at all with any detail. I just see blackness. But if I can create like 12 inches of distance, I can say, okay, I have two hands and there's 5 fingers on each and they move, and so I get a much clearer perspective on my hands from creating a sense of distance between the observer and the observed. And the way the non-duality or the meditation comes into the process we've been talking about so far is to create that sense of separation. So if I'm like completely wrapped up in my thoughts and they're saying you're ugly, you're depressed, you're this, you're that, then it's just like being blown around all over the place. You're just attached to every thought that arises, and that's the nature of our consciousness, is to become attached to thoughts and identify with them. So meditatively, if we can slow down and have that same sense of distance, then that when you're ugly, you're worthless, whatever thought arises, or even it doesn't have to be something dark, it can be more like a how am I going to solve this problem at work kind of thought, okay? Then there's that sense of seeing it from a distance, and then two things. One, you've got the perspective I mentioned, and the second thing, it's not so much like it's happening to you. It's like you're witnessing something that's a bit distant from you, and it's not so overwhelming. So that gives that's where that comes into it.
Yeah, and that's a matter of identity, Richard, isn't it? So it's a sense of, and it's what's being talked about all over the shop today, isn't it? You know, who am I? Who am I at the deepest part of myself? And if I am not my body and my mind, then something like an experience of ugliness would not make any sense anymore. That can only make sense if I believe I am my body and my mind. If I understand that the body and the mind arises within me and is not who I am, then actually things that happen to the body, or the appearance of the body, or the experiences of the body become impersonal in a sense. Doesn't mean that they're not still felt and that they can really hurt, but that the sense of identity is gone. Anthony de Mello said, before enlightenment I was depressed, after enlightenment I was depressed. The only difference was I didn't identify with my depression. You know, it all keeps going, but the perspective is totally different, and therefore the experience of it.
And that is, that's all. Thank you very much for...
Thank you.